begin. In the previous episode, we discussed the concept of the self and its impact on our relationship, decision making, destiny, internal dialogue, and stress levels. Our daily functioning is heavily influenced by the alignment of a survival mechanism and the self. This two mechanism controls almost all of our activities and shape who we are and what we do. In today's episode, we will be exploring one of the major components that affects our lives, known as emotions. The topic for today's episode is the emotional hangovers. The reason why emotion is referred to as hangover is because it works similar to when someone is intoxicated. The hangover lasts for a certain period of time and then eventually wears off, leaving the person sober again. Similarly, when a person experiences an emotional high, they continue to operate from that state until it fades away, and then they return to a sober state until some other events triggers their emotions again. Emotions plays a significant role in our personal and professional life, especially in our relationships and decision making. You have heard in my previous podcast on decision making and how emotions can influence our processes. Emotions makes us swing as if we are on a pendulum. As long as emotions are positive, we like to stay on that side, unaware that the emotional pendulum movement will swing us to the other side. On the other side, we experience discomfort and pain, and we try hard to move away from it towards pleasure. And the circus of life on the trapeze goes on, swinging from one end to the other. You are on one end of the pendulum that swings, and the other end is held by someone. Life is no different, where our survival depends on others. Someone is holding our life's pendulum, and we are at the other end, oscillating back and forth. At times, we are dangling in a suspended animation, and that is the time we experience confusion, indecisiveness, depression, and loss. We don't realize that emotions are traps that comes with the package known as life. Fear is the primary emotion. Every living organism has a natural instinct to survive, but our abilities to do so depends on our parents and others around us. They have a significant role to determine our fate, and the more we meet their expectation, the better our chances of survival become. In fact, we are born with the inbuilt fear that we might perish if our creators are displeased with us. Therefore, fear becomes our primary emotion, and all other emotion stems from this fundamental emotion. Emotion impacts us in different ways depending on the type of emotion we experience at any given point. We cannot escape from this phenomena entirely. The person who has learned to stay neutral could be a wise person who does not allow emotions to affect the present state of being. How do our emotions get provoked? Let's explore the working of our emotions as we dive deeper into today's podcast. I assume you remember Jimmy's story mentioned in the previous episode. The mother told her son Jimmy to complete his school homework and then go to play. He happily completes it and goes to the mother to seek her approval. She tells him that his handwriting is ugly and makes him write 2 pages to improve it. The boy completes the task with negative emotion, sulking. Sulking is a mild, unexpressed anger. Jimmy, 7 years old, had accomplished his goal. The loop was complete when he finished his homework. He was experiencing positive emotion on completion of his schoolwork, and his mother's approval and permission to play would have made him happy. But his mother does the reverse of what was expected, and that leads to disappointment and anger. But he can't revolt against the mother, so he feels helpless. Sulkingly, he completes his work. How did emotions surface in the case of Jimmy? Jimmy is aware of his homework and agrees to his mother's request to complete the work. You notice that there are both positive and negative emotions. Initially, it is a sense of completion and wanting to seek approval, which is important for the child, that would make Jimmy happy. But the mother holds a pendulum, and Jimmy dangling on the other end. She declares the loop incomplete. That leads to negative emotion. Who triggered Jimmy's emotion? In other words, Jimmy knows who is the boss, which means his mother provoked his emotion. What are emotions? Emotions are the fusion of energy between two or more people, as seen in the case of Jimmy. Basically, it is the fusion between the survival mechanism and the self. Self is dominant and has control over the survival mechanism. Thus, the person will feel trapped every time they experience negative emotion, but feel comfortable when the self is satisfied. The decision of whether Jimmy's homework is complete rests solely with his mother, regardless of whether he meets her expectation. Only she can decide whether the goal is fulfilled or not, or simply shift the goalpost by giving another task. For any person to experience any emotion, there have to be two or more people. Let's take on the sentence I mentioned in my previous episode. I'm angry with myself. If we substitute I with Jack and myself with Jill, the sentence becomes Jack is angry with Jill. This implies that two people are involved. One feels angry towards the other. For anyone to experience any emotion, a person or people may not be physically present. Even a specific memory can trigger an emotion. As long as you can please the self, then you experience positive emotion. If the self is displeased, you will experience negative emotion. The survival mechanism is dependent on the self for how you experience the outcome. As in the case of Jimmy, the mother sets the agenda and also decides on the outcome. The child has no choice over his emotions but unconsciously pleases the mother, which means the control is in her hands. The result of that fusion could be positive, negative, or mixed. When all the parties have a positive outcome, the resultant is positive. Let me provide you with simple examples so that you can understand. The mother tells the little boy that on completion of the task, you will have ice cream. Both keep their promise, therefore, both experience positive emotions. In another case, the mother did arithmetic problem wrongly, and the daughter told her where the mistake was. Mother, to hide her embarrassment, rebukes the daughter. Both are experiencing negative emotion, and the mother is transferring her anger to the daughter by finding some other fault of hers. In the case of Jimmy, the mother is satisfied because she was able to keep Jimmy busy for some time by giving him the task of writing 2 pages. Our emotions are complex, often consisting of both positive and negative aspects. For instance, if you have been following a sport game and have a favorite player or a team that you are favoring, you will feel happy if your preferred player or team wins. However, the losing team and its fan may be experiencing negative emotion such as disappointment or frustration. Most of the time, others trigger our emotions. We often react to others' communication and behaviors. All of it happens in a few seconds. There are some who will suppress their emotion for some time, but it gets channelized as an outburst, a subtle attack later. If the emotions are not expressed externally, then it creates some other complication within the body that are termed psychosomatic illnesses. Let's take the example of Manoj, discussed in the previous episode. Everywhere Manoj goes, his parents, who instill the habit of vegetarianism, aren't sitting around him, reminding him that he is vegetarian. But the rules and regulations are registered in his memory, which gets accessed each time he comes across a similar situation. He must obey the rule. If not, the self will remind him how he has disobeyed the family rule, and that would trigger the feeling of guilt, which he wants to avoid at all costs. Even though Manoj is adult and logically knows eating non-veg is harmless, the self is so powerful that it triggers negative emotions. We all experience emotions no matter what survival mechanism is installed within us. But the question is, do we experience all the emotions in the similar way, or is the intensity the same? I understand that it may be challenging for me to provide detailed information about each survival mechanism and its connected emotions. However, it's important to note that each mechanism expresses emotions in its unique way. The emotions expressed are influenced by a specific survival belief and the traits of each mechanism. While all of the mechanisms express emotions, their reaction and expressions can be quite different from one another. Allow me to explain how each survival mechanism expresses emotions briefly. Wanted children and emotions. A wanted child is a desired child, and a lot of expectations are placed on them. If they cannot meet the demands of the self, that will frustrate and upset them and turn into anger after some time. Their anger could be directed outward towards someone, or long frustration could make them helpless and depressed. If the issue does not get resolved and their trap continues, then they could turn inward to terminate one's body, as in the case of Amit. The undercurrent of all the emotion is fear, that failing to fulfill the desires of the self means the threat to their survival. The wanted children are performance oriented and that they must meet the preset benchmarks. If they fail to meet the targets, then they can easily feel ashamed and guilty. Some core qualities are commitment, loyalty, and integrity, and if they cannot meet those criteria, they will experience shame and avoid meeting people. They will try to avoid blame at all costs to maintain the self-image of sparkling clean. They are highly cautious and don't like failures. Failures means people looking down on them, which means embarrassment, and they may even go into hiding. In the case of Amit, in the episode The Trap Meeting Others' Expectation, the self that is his mother plays the dominant role. His survival mechanism feels incompetent to counter her and does not know ways to handle the situation. In the beginning, he is happy to contribute to building a new house in the village. But as the cost crosses his financial limits, he is feeling the heat. From that point, he gets spiraled into an endless loop, sucking him into financial debt. His survival mechanism does not have tools and ways to come out of the survival maze. Only the trap gets expanded, which pushes him to the brink of making a premature exit. To know more about Amit's story, you can listen to the episode 3 and 4. Partly wanted children and their emotions. Partly wanted children will try and please the self by being good boy, good girl for a long time. Their purpose is to gain acceptance, especially from the person who has rejected them. Later, they could have a spouse like that of that parent and will also experience rejection again. They might not express their anger verbally. It is difficult for them to defend themselves logically and with reason. They will feel helpless and the suppressed anger will erupt in physical retaliation. Later, they will regret the action and apologize. Many a times, to buy peace, they often end up apologizing, even though they are not at fault. As in the case of Sweetie, mentioned in my earlier podcast, partly wanted children and their survival traits. They are short-tempered, but most of the time they are jovial and hardworking. When things don't change and their resilience and patience do not bear fruit, they will feel disappointed and depressed. Too much of compliance will cause them pain, and that will make them feel helpless, leading to depression and psychosomatic ailments. Unwanted children and emotions. One of the primary emotions of unwanted children is rejection. They will counter it by molding their voice and behaviors to fit into other person's model of the world. In the previous episode, I mentioned Fanny, a foreign national who fell in love with an Indian. She could not take the rejection from her boyfriend. She was depressed. A similar thing happened to her when she was 18 years old. She lost 15 kg and became anorexic. But this time, she Indianized her personality and was able to win the heart of the person, even though the marriage lasted for a few years. In the previous episode, The Survival Traits of Unwanted Children, you heard about Hema and how she trapped her husband Rajan. Finally, Rajan was blamed and also made to feel guilty, saying that he has anger issues. They will be telling lies, and even when they are exposed, they will cover up and shamelessly continue with their regular routine as if nothing has happened. On the contrary, they will be indifferent to the pain they have caused to others. They hardly feel guilty, and worse, it's difficult for them to ask for an apology. Even if they do so, it's a superficial one. They usually don't fight their wars directly, face to face, but hold their anger and wait for the right moment to strike back. Every unexpressed anger comes out in the form of revenge. They will plan in a subtle way to get even, or somebody will be executing their plan. It is like they are hiding behind another person with a gun placed on the person's shoulder, or they will provoke another person to fight their battle. Understanding one's true nature is crucial to achieve neutrality instead of reacting impulsively to others. It's important to realize that everyone operates from their own survival mechanism, interpreting and perceiving the world through their own lenses. By learning about the self that governs the survival mechanism, one can be neutral and live life filled with inner peace and harmony. To listen to more podcasts and to watch YouTube videos, please feel free to visit my website at www.livingwithfreedom.com. I also have 2 books available for purchase on various platforms: Stop Surviving, Start Living with Freedom, and The Self Decoded. The better you know who you are and the working of your internal mechanism, the more likely you will experience joy and peace. In the upcoming podcast, you will have an opportunity to learn something new and unique. In the meantime, I encourage you to look for opportunities to express gratitude for everything around you. See you next week.